Okay, so today we're going to make some sauerkraut, just classic sauerkraut, easiest, probably most ubiquitous lacto-ferment out there. So it's a good place probably to start, even though we started with hot sauce, but that's also quite easy. And so equipment-wise, so you can use a food processor, and I do when I'm making more than one batch, but really that's not really wholly necessary. A knife is just fine. I use a Nikiri, it's a Japanese vegetable knife. It's got that sort of flat bottom, so you don't end up with that rocking motion, so you don't end up like with accordion onions. It's really good for scallions, actually. Um, of course, we need cabbage, caraway. You can use allspice berries or pretty much anything you want, but for classic sauerkraut, we're talking about caraway. Salt, of course, a scale, jar, wide mouth is what I use, plus this lid that's got a grommet and an airlock. Again, you can always put a loose lid on there that allows gas to escape. There's different kind of fermentation lids. I think Mason Top sells some that kind of burp, self-burp. Otherwise, if you're just using a screw lid, you're going to have to loosen that once a day at least because you don't want too much carbon dioxide buildup. And that pressure will blow the jar before it blows the lid off. It's a lot thicker up here, number one, but number two, just the way it's threaded on. Same thing happens with beer bottles. When we have overcarbonation, they just explode. So there's your little safety tip. We need a bowl is kind of handy. And so the first thing that I'm going to do, which is what I always do, is I take a piece of, masking tape. I use the green stuff because I have it, but any tape's fine. I'm just going to write here sauerkraut and the date, which if you'd like to know is, it's April 1st. This is not a joke. And I'm just going to cut it so it's nice and square. I'm doing this before because the jar can get wet and then the tape won't stick and it's just annoying. So there it is. So I'm going to put that to the side for now. So the first thing we need to do is sort of process this cabbage. I'm using a quarter cabbage because I don't feel like doing a whole cabbage and you don't feel like watching me do a whole cabbage either. So I'm just going to kind of cut the core out here because that is not the part that I want. Put that to the side, and then we've got all this viable cabbage. So you can shred it as finely as you want or as thickly, I guess. The reality is the way I'm cutting it here, I'm going to end up with these big chunks, so I'm going to have to cross-cut it. But it's really up to you how you do it. The more surface area, the easier the ferment's going to be. That's for sure. Okay, so I've chopped this all up. Now I'm going to put this on the scale, set the scale to 0, and I am going to throw all this cabbage in. Okay, so we have 700 grams here, which is 701, but I think 700 is probably a good call. We want 2.5% salt by weight on pretty much everything. That's a good standard. 2% is fine, 3% is fine. I find that 2.5% just gives us the salinity we want without it being overly salty, so it makes it a little bit more edible. So I use 2.5% pretty much across the board on lacto-ferments. The exception basically being things like kvass, where it would be undrinkable. And so obviously I lowered a little bit there. So at 700, we're going to call it, we want 2.5%, so the 17.5 grams of salt. So I'm going to set the scale to 0 again. And now we're using sea salt here. You don't want to use table salt that's been iodized. Iodine is antimicrobial by nature, and so obviously we don't want to be killing all of the bacteria and such things that we're asking to convert this for us. And so table salt's good. Sorry, not table salt. Sea salt's great. Kosher salt is good. Just anything that's not been processed. So just pure sodium chloride and plus whatever trace minerals, but natural salt. All right, so enough talking. Let's get rocking. Okay, so there we go. That's 18. That's fine. And now caraway seeds, I want about 1% here. So I'm going to go for 7 grams. They're pretty light, so it's actually a lot more than you think. It's not enough. That's still not enough. There we go, 7 grams. And now the main thing is to really get in here. We need to really crush this up with our clean hands, of course, but not hands that have been totally disinfected. We don't want to get like, antibacterial soap residues or anything that's really going to kill these nice guys. And so, you've got to really kind of work this in, work the salt in. Sometimes I let it rest for a couple of minutes just so that salt sort of starts to draw some water out, just do the osmosis. But I won't bore you with that, so I'll just keep crushing this up. Okay, so that's fairly crushed. Now we're going to pack it into the jar. And my little tip of the day here is I make kind of a well in the center. You know, like when you're making homemade pasta and you pull the flour out, make a well, and then put the egg in there. I guess it's not even close to being the same thing, but it looks the same. And so this way, when I spill this, which I'm going to spill it all over the place regardless, but I'm going to spill less of it on the counter and more in the bowl, which I can then pick up and put back in. So that's my hot tip. Okay, so that's all packed in. A couple of things I forgot to mention earlier that are handy but not necessary. A glass weight, and you can buy these specifically for wide mouth mason jars. It just helps keep everything submerged below the brine. You can also just have saved a piece of cabbage leaf and stuff that, get some brine on top. So it's not necessary, it's just nice to have. And a pickle packer. You can probably buy these. You could use pretty much anything that you can shove in there. I mean, I just made this out of some wood on a lathe because I didn't feel like buying one. I think they're fairly expensive for what they are, but they're pretty handy. So what you can do is really pack that down, right, and get it below so that you can really get this compacted and get some of that brine released and get it submerged. And you can see we're getting a lot of water released here. In some cases, when the cabbage is a bit old, it's a bit dried out maybe, and it's not releasing enough water. And this goes for all lacto-ferments. You know, there's some wisdom out there, you can't add water, which is nonsense. Just make sure that when you add water, you weigh the water separately and then add salt. So make sure you have a brine of 2.5% salt by weight for the water, and then you can add it and top it up and do whatever you like. Also, just of course, making sure that it's natural salt, not iodized, and also make sure that the water is not chlorinated. So you need to use spring water or filtered water because the chlorine, of course, will kill all the stuff that we want. So there we go. I'm going to screw this lid on. And I'm going to fill up my airlock here. Again, you can use water because there's going to be pressure and it's just going to be blowing. This water just basically stops anything from getting back in. So you're stopping oxygen from getting in. The carbon monoxide, oh God, that would be bad. The carbon dioxide pushes up through here, then goes down through the water and then escapes through the air holes. But the reverse, of course, doesn't happen. And you could put, if you're paranoid, you can put like a phosphoric acid solution like Star San, which we use for sanitizing beer equipment, in here. You can use salted water like a brine. You can use vodka. You can just put water in it like I did because I'm not worried. And if a little bit of water gets drawn in here, it's not the end of the world. We've got enough salt in there to keep us in good shape. And there we have it. We have now made just basic lacto-fermented sauerkraut. And so what's going to happen now over the next few weeks or days is at first, there's some enterobacter and other things that are already in there. They're going to get to work. They're not going to last very long. Leuconostic maceroides is going to come in and lower the pH and start breaking down some of this cabbage. And then the lactobacillus, various strains, and I mean, we could pull it out and run it under a microscope and do a bunch of stuff, and I'd still have no idea what to look for. We'd have to stain it and all the rest. But we do know that there's lactobacillus in there. There's a bunch of different strains, Brevis, Plantarum, et cetera, that are usually dominant in these. But once again, they all have their sort of unique biome. And so they're going to start really degrading the carbohydrates and a lot of the fiber. And so it's going to break down some of the cell walls. The salt is drawing some of those nutrients out for that bacteria to eat. And then what we end up with is a sort of a semi-predigested concoction of vegetables, in this case, cabbage. And it makes a lot of things more bioavailable. So there's going to be way more vitamin C than there would in raw cabbage. The B vitamin argument is pretty, I think, pretty suspect, to be honest. But and the probiotic argument, obviously, we can talk about another day. But the reality is we're going to get something that has got more bioavailable nutrients for us and most importantly, it's going to be super delicious. So this is going to be about 7 days, I think, just out of room temperature, and then 7 days in the fridge. That's kind of standard. And then at the end of that period, we're going to have something that looks more like this. You can see the big color change. This one actually went for a lot longer, so that's maybe misinformation, but it's not really. It's going to be darker like that, and it's going to be much softer. The longer you let it go, the softer it's going to be. But 14 days is probably your minimum total before consumption. Otherwise, you're going to get sort of an unfinished product. And that's it for that. See you next time.